Hey, how's it going all? I just want to do what I think will be a relatively quick lesson, but I want to go through a list that I made of characteristics of God that I feel that we as humans can practice, get good at, improve at, work on, in the very least be aware of to align ourselves most directly with the God of the Bible. So obviously this is assuming that God exists, and then the God of the Bible is the one that created the earth and all of us. And so I think it's a very safe assumption to make, in the days that we live in. And I cite, really the rest of my channel and flat earth and Russian vids and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's pretty quote unquote safe bet, in my opinion, that the God of the Bible is the one who architected all of this. And so if that is the case, assuming that that's in place, I boiled down four things that I feel characterize the God of the Bible very, very well, and summarize a lot of the way that he is that we can understand, and live and practice on a day to day. And I feel like if we do this, even to some degree, practice it as much as we can, as much as we're able to. And I would think that there are times that we're doing these things and we don't know it, but just to be aware of it, I think that it's good, and I think that obviously, I believe that Jesus Christ is the best and perfect example of the Most High in human form. So I will use, examples of things that he did to support, these 4 points. And so to me, this is what I think from a high level, and I've done, I think, a video on this in the past, what I think at sort of a very high level is happening, and how, we are spiritual beings, if God exists, that there is something in us that will carry on, and what that thing is being groomed and conditioned to be like God, and ultimately to return to God, to return to the Most High. And how we're able to return to him and detach ourselves and operate in a way that we think is independent of God, no one knows. That's impossible to know how he's doing that. And then the why can be answered, not fully obviously with this video, but some of these things would be, I would think, part of the reason why we're here, to condition ourselves and grow in these characteristics and many more. But I just think these four summarize the God of the Bible very well. And then ultimately what God's doing at the highest level, literally in his mind, which is why I call my channel The Mind of God. No one knows, it's too brilliant, and no one could know, just even the mechanics of it, how he's able to stitch, spirits inside bodies, and how they're altered by inhabiting a human body and going through quote unquote life on earth. No one knows, that's way too complicated. And just knowing what a spirit is in and of itself is very, very difficult to understand. So I'm not gonna obviously attempt to do that, but I think that, again, if God exists, one would think that ultimately that there's some journey back towards him, for a group of people, and hopefully we are in that group, because in my opinion there would be no better place to be, than near God and understanding his mind, to whatever extent that he would allow us. But I think, from the God of the Bible, it's very clear that these four things are characteristics that he likes, and he exudes quote unquote naturally. It's just part of him, and again, expressed through Jesus Christ. And it's worth reaffirming, to those out there. And it's good for me personally to remind myself, that these characteristics are unquestionably virtuous, in the mind of God. So first, generosity, just from just sort of thinking of this like logically, and just sort of axiomatically, like God has to be generous and giving because he's only capable of giving. If we're looking at the source, like if this is like the point source, this is God, and everything exists outside of it because of this source, it's only able to emanate, it's only able to give off things. It's not able to like take, because everything that existed came out of, let's use my fist as an analogy, like this is the Most High. This is the quote point source for everything. And so God can only give. He is, so by definition, he's generous because he can only give. We may not like the things that he gives us. That's fair, and that's allowed. And I would say that that's logical, rational, and reasonable to interact with God in that way. Like, why are you giving me certain things, certain trials, tribulations, and all that kind of stuff? But fundamentally, God is generous because he's only able to give. He's only able to emanate his ideas, and how they manifest into physical things. And so that, by definition, is true. And what we can do on the day-to-day, and the God of the Bible is very upfront about how it's not the size of the gift, and he stops in his tracks and shows his disciples a woman who's donating, a very, very small amount relative to what she has. It's a lot. And so it's not the amount itself, that God will use to measure whether somebody's being generous, and it's not even financial either. It's obviously many, many things that we can do. If somebody just needs help, they're moving, they need help with their house, whatever, like there's so many different ways that we can be generous, to people. It's difficult for me, and I'm not making excuses, but I do find that in the last few years, I've been very kind of isolated. I don't really have that many interactions, but there are still opportunities for me to be generous, to people around me and stuff. And so it's always a good idea to take those opportunities, when we can. It's a good idea because it aligns with the very, very fundamental principle of God, that he's generous. Humble is another thing. And the thing that is amazing about a God, like I said, who only gives and emanates, how something or entity can do that and still be humble, we don't understand, because that's not what we're taught. We're taught to, like, once you do something, sit back, enjoy it, take credit for it, use it to acknowledge how special we are and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying all of that's necessarily always evil, but it's just very, very different to, like, the way we are, in this human body. But God inherently is humble, and we've seen that. There's way too many examples for me to cite of the things that Jesus did that prove that he's humble. And to me, a lot of it is actually things that he didn't do, and things that he didn't say. He didn't go tattletale on everybody. He didn't go air out dirty laundry in the streets, which he could, because he knew everything that everybody has ever done, and so he could easily have been a gossip. He could have easily have used what he knew to manipulate people, and all that, blackmail, all that kind of stuff. He could have did so many different things, and called out people's sins publicly, embarrassed them, shamed them, and all that kind of stuff. So to me, all the things that he did do, just dying on the cross, at the hands of people that he came to love, is humble enough. But all the things that he didn't say and didn't do, to me, are also powerful examples of his humility. And the analogy that I use is that it's kind of a poor analogy, but it's just something I thought about with golf. It's like with in golf, for example, like I can't be like the best golfer in the world, like Tiger Woods or somebody like that, because obviously they've been practicing, they're very, very skilled at it, and just have natural talent towards golf. But like putting, for example, like if anybody knows golf, it's like when you're kind of close to the hole, it's called putting. Like you just have, it's sometimes called a flat stick, and you putt, maybe 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 feet away from the hole. I can putt as well, again, if I practiced it, as well as a lot of the professional golfers. Like it obviously, again, would take a lot of time, practice, but there's not as many sort of moving parts involved. And I could even potentially have a better intuition, just quote unquote God-given, about reading, the lay of the land, the greens, than certain professionals. Not every single professional, but it's likely if I was the best putter in the world, I'd probably be making money from golf, but or certainly a lot better than I am. But my point is that at the quote local level, closer to the hole, with less sort of moving parts, like I'm able to be a very, very highly skilled golfer. So I don't have to hit like the full shots, the really, really long drives and very, very precise shots, like the pros do, but close to the whole, I can do well. And so to me, this analogy is similar to us with God, obviously exaggerated infinitely, but on the quote local level, like we're able to be humble, like we're not able to like I said earlier, be generous, make an earth, and like make people and stitch spirits in them. Like obviously, I don't know what to say. Like obviously we can't do that, but we're able to, we can be humble, like on a local level, we can be humble. And in many ways, we should actually be more inclined to be humble because we haven't done any of those things, and we never will on that level as the Most High. And so, this to me is one of the characteristics that should actually be sort of the easiest for us to like digest, and I think that also to me, and this is like more of a personal testimony, what I feel like, even if we're not living in the end times, having the sort of mentality that we could be close is a very humbling thing, because I know now that I'm in control of very, very little, even in my own personal life. And so that's also, to me, a very powerful thing about living in the potentially the end times, that it's sort of implicitly humbling, because I realize more and more, again, like I said, how little I control, of obviously the macro narrative, but also micro, and how I fit into what I believe is a beast system. And so it's actually humbling, and to me that, it's good, it's a good thing that has happened, even if we're not living in the end times. I think it's a very sort of virtuous trait, to have grow in whatever way that it can grow, but fundamentally, we should be humble, just knowing that we didn't make ourselves, we didn't, we just, it's not like physiologically it didn't happen. We know that because our parents made us, but just the idea of us, did not come even from our parents, and so that alone should be enough for us to be humble. But there's lots of things to me that point to the fact that we should be humble. If the God of the universe, who created all things and is perfect and brilliant, can be humble and lowly at heart, we should be more inclined to that. So, the golf analogy is like, we can't do all those other big things, the hard things, be a professional golfer, but when it's close to the hole, and like we have the same sort of kind of resources, as a person, as a professional golfer, there's less things that can go wrong. We're able to mimic somebody who's a professional, on the greens. And so I think that's the same way in our sort of day-to-day at the micro level. We are able to be humble, and in many ways we should be able to do even potentially greater works of humility than God. And Jesus says that, his disciples, his followers will do the same works that he's done and even more. And to me, this should be rooted in the fact that we should be more inclined to humility. Obviously, we will never quote out humble God, because he defines what humility is. So we don't even know all the times that we're being quote unquote humble. But I just say this as sort of even further example of how humble God is, because like he's humble enough to say that we could do more than him. And so like we will never out humble him, because he's just the way he is. Like this is just a beautiful entity that all we can do is sometimes scratch our head and worship, but we will never out humble him. But his humility is proven again in the fact that he said that those that follow him will do even greater works. And so to me, the people that would do that he would credit that those quote unquote greater works would have humbled themselves very, very deeply, for the obvious reason that God is humble, and then also we should be more inclined to humility because we are sinful people. So number 2 is humility. The third is being forgiving, and I think this is kind of the hardest one to sort of know how to practice it, and I'm just speaking in my own personal life, because I would say we rarely have people, I've rarely had people come up to me like asking for forgiveness. I've never had that situation. I'm not even saying that, the people around me are bad people. I'm saying I've never really had a situation where somebody has done something, I'm trying to think, where they kind of needed to be like formally come up to me and like forgive me. Obviously people have said things, that whatever may have hurt my feelings at some point. And I'm not talking about that kind of stuff, but even with that, I've never had a situation where like somebody has come up to me explicitly and been like, I'm sorry, or so. I'm sure it's happened once or twice, but it's not like tons of times. And so it's kind of it's a difficult thing for me to sort of practice or get better at. But I would say it's also even compounded by the fact that lately I don't really interact with that many people. So there's no real room for people to like quote unquote hurt me because I'm interacting with people in a very, very structured way day to day. And that's by design because of the times that we live in. But again, we know that is a thing that God values because there's a parable called the parable of the unforgiving servant, which, to me is one of the best summaries of possibly the entire Bible, where God forgives somebody, but then that individual goes and, holds a debt against somebody, and God absolutely like destroys them, and that God is not, he can't be mocked. You can't swindle God. You can't trick God. He's, like I said, he made everything. So, if God is forgiving and he's forgiven us, whether explicitly or implicitly, indirectly or directly, he's expecting that from us, and again, for all the people out there who have people who maybe have come up to them and sincerely asked for forgiveness, it's a good time to align and draw closer to the God of the Bible, and I sometimes, I don't know, it would be kind of good to have examples like that, but then it also scares me because people have done things to other people that I don't know how they've forgiven others. The God of the Bible to me is an extreme example. How, somebody could be brutalized like that, and with the last bit of energy he has, petition the Father to forgive them. I could not know that. To me, that is the most unique aspect of God. Is that like healing and all that. Again, I'm not saying that that's trivial, but there's like there's like medical people, now, even though I believe the medical system and the pharmaceutical industry is completely satanic, but they've repaired people, and healed them pretty much almost back to normal health, and that's doable without divine intervention. But to die on the cross in that way and then ask God to forgive them, that's not a human thing. That cannot be reproduced in a laboratory, modernized, automated, or anything like that. To me, that is the most unique feature of the God of the Bible, and for me, one of the many reasons and one of the most sort of prominent reasons why I worship him, because that's an incredible thing. That is absolutely not human, not spiritual, it's not human, purely spiritual. And I just don't know how that someone can do that, because it just goes against everything that I know, and the way that we are. And so that to me is an incredible thing. Forgiveness is, I would say, one of the sort of pillars of the Christian faith. And, again, this is very easy to say and not easy to practice. Possibly one of the hardest of these four things to do is to forgive people, and we're required even to forgive our enemies, which, like I said, Jesus did for those who brutalized him. And so this is a very, very supreme ethic in the Bible. And really, the other two things have to be in place. To me, if a person is not humbled and know that one sin equals all sins and all that kind of stuff that will imbue this kind of humility that the Bible requires, a person will not have a forgiving disposition, So these things all sort of work together, but to me, humility and forgiveness are sort of, when you do one, you get the other one for free. You don't have forgiving people who are not humble, they just, how? Like, you can't sort of circumvent either of those without the other. And a humble person will be forgiving because they know that they've committed all sins and they're a sinner. And so, they have sort of, like I said, in the parable of the unforgiving servant, they would know that their debts have been forgiven, and then they have to be inclined to forgive other people's debts and start the whole forgiveness kind of Ponzi scheme, but in this case, it's a scheme that's on the right-hand side and is virtuous, and it just passes down, trickles down to everybody. And so, again, I just want to be clear in that forgiveness is not the easiest thing because, it's not for people to just constantly like, abuse us, like especially in the times that we live in now, like the government and all that. And also we're not called to like just see other people getting leverage and just, turn a blind eye to that. Like that's not what we're required. So forgiveness is not just kind of let everybody do whatever they want. So it's a very difficult thing, in my opinion, to practice. This is where we need God to guide us and help us understand when he wants it and how he wants us to react. But broadly speaking, forgiveness to me is a trait that a characteristic, a quality that aligns a person with the God of the Bible directly. And then the last one I put is physiology control, and I would say that this is sort of the result of having the other three pretty solid, and that's just not being like emotional, not being jittery and all that. And obviously, Jesus had a difficult time leading up to his death, and just we've seen it, with just his prayer and petitioning God for another way. So it doesn't always mean that everything's sort of hunky-dory, rosy all the time. But generally speaking, his physiology control to me, again, but largely because of things that he didn't say and didn't do, was incredible, And again, just the fact that he was able to muster up the energy to ask God to forgive those who brutalized him is another proof that he had a certain control over his body that we cannot get to at that level, and that's, he got to that level obviously because he's God and blessed, but also just the fasting and the discipline that he had when he lived his life is incredible. And so again, we can practice this kind of like the golf analogy. We will not be like quote unquote Jesus Christ at that level, but on the micro level, on the greens, putting, we can do it, in little ways. And I think for me, I've realized like when that gets out of whack, and it gets physiology uncontrolled, I have to then sort of prescribe myself certain things to get back to a place where I can, and sometimes for me, it involves not being around people. I've just realized that like this is the difficult thing for me currently, is that I still enjoy playing golf, but I don't really control my physiology that well on the golf course. So I have to figure out how to do it and then still be able to interact with people and not take out my frustrations on other people, whether they be about golf or like life or something. And so, I don't want to have to like play golf by myself, like it's more fun with people, even if they're people that I don't, see eye to eye with on really anything. But so that's like a challenge for me. I can't just keep sort of removing people from my life, to get physiology control, because then to me it's just, I don't know, that's not really that much of an accomplishment, And so again, I'm not saying go and hang out with every ridiculous and sinful person out there, but it's very difficult to isolate ourselves completely and then still, function, in this world. So again, I would say that's a bit of a difficult balance in the times that we live in. But even in amongst our quiet time, and for me personally, there are times where just thinking about certain things can get me kind of riled up, and like I have to get better at that. And I think the one thing that does help is that I don't blame, like from a theoretical point of view, I don't blame, things going on in the world with individuals that much anymore, or I'm trying to like reduce that down to zero, because I know that it's God, because the deception and the coordinated evil is so broad and pervasive that God has to be behind it. And so that's a good, nugget to help me, has helped me, but I need to see that kind of more fully develop, in my own life, for it to kind of bear fruit, and to align myself more and more with God. And that's also kind of a very difficult one. But again, I would say these four things, obviously this is not an exhaustive list, but these four things to me, if a person focuses on, and, the cool thing about God is that, once you kind of give him attention, he'll give us attention, and I think that, and he always gives it more back, again, because he's generous. And so whatever we offer to him, he'll return it back. The Bible says you can't even contain it. You'd have to press it, squeeze it, thrown on your lap. It'll be overwhelming. And so that's the way God is. And so I think that if we show God certain care for these type of things and worship him, through these things and other things that we know that he likes, either sort of that he explicitly says that he likes, or sort of reading between the lines, like physiology control. I think that he will reward us, in different ways, by just maybe having these things grow, or even just by him acknowledging, just telling us, like through the Spirit, like he liked the way we handled a certain situation, that type of thing. That's enough. Like just a compliment from God means that God exists and that he's watching, over us and acknowledging us. And so that's really all that a person needs, in my opinion, throughout their entire life. That's worth more than anything that this world can provide, especially in these days where the world is offering garbage, to us. So it's infinitely more valuable, but it would have been valuable throughout even less evil times that we have now, getting acknowledgement from God. So just put that out there, just to think about. So hope everyone's doing well. Bye.